What makes an avoidance walls crumble instantly when the right person says the right thing? You've probably witnessed this yourself, watching someone effortlessly connect with an avoidant who seemed completely unreachable to everyone else. One conversation, and suddenly that guarded person becomes warm, open, and genuinely present. It's not magic, and it's not about being special or having some mystical connection. There's a specific psychological mechanism at play that most people completely miss. The difference between people who bounce off avoidant walls and people who walk right through them comes down to one fundamental approach that most people get completely backwards. Most people try to break down avoidant walls by being understanding, patient, and emotionally available. They think that showing love and commitment will eventually convince an avoidant to let their guard down, but this approach actually strengthens the walls because it activates the very fears that made the avoidant build those walls in the first place. The people who successfully get past avoidant defenses aren't doing what seems obvious or intuitive. They're not trying to prove their worth, demonstrate their love, or show how safe they are. Instead, they're doing something that seems almost contradictory to everything we're taught about building trust and intimacy. The technique that actually works goes against every instinct you have about how to connect with someone emotionally distant. When you see it in action, you'll understand why avoidance responds so differently to this approach than to conventional relationship advice. Every failed attempt to break through an avoidance walls follows the same pattern. You notice they're pulling away, so you try to close the distance. You sense they're feeling overwhelmed, so you offer reassurance. You see they're struggling with emotions, so you try to help them process their feelings. Each of these responses feels natural and caring, but to an avoidant, they feel like pressure. When you chase someone who's pulling away, you confirm their fear that relationships lead to loss of independence. When you offer reassurance to someone feeling overwhelmed, you become another thing they need to manage emotionally. When you try to help them process feelings, you become a reminder of the emotional intensity they're trying to escape. Your caring responses trigger their core wounds around autonomy and control. Avoidance learned early that emotional needs lead to disappointment, that depending on others creates vulnerability, and that the safest place is emotional self-sufficiency. Every time you try to be the solution to their emotional distress, you remind them why they built walls in the first place. This creates a cycle where your attempts to get closer push them further away, which makes you try even harder to connect, which makes them retreat even more. You're both responding to your attachment wounds. You're trying to prevent abandonment by pursuing, and they're trying to prevent engulfment by withdrawing. But some people never get caught in this cycle. They approach avoidance in a way that doesn't trigger defensive responses. These people seem to have an intuitive understanding of avoidant psychology, or they've learned through experience what actually works. They don't chase, they don't rescue, and they don't try to be emotional healers. Instead, they do something that initially seems counterintuitive. They match the avoidance energy and give them exactly what they think they want. When an avoidant pulls away, these people don't chase, they respect the distance. When an avoidant becomes emotionally unavailable, they don't try to draw them out. They become equally independent. This mirroring behavior confuses avoidance because it doesn't fit their expectations about how people behave in relationships. They're used to people pursuing them when they withdraw, getting upset when they create distance, or trying to fix them when they shut down. When someone responds to their avoidance with equal detachment, it disrupts their entire defensive system. The psychological principle at work here is called the scarcity effect. When something becomes less available, we automatically assign it higher value. Avoidants are used to being the scarce resource in relationships. They're the ones who withdraw, create distance, and control the level of intimacy. When you become equally scarce, you shift the entire dynamic. But this isn't about playing games or being manipulative. It's about genuinely developing your own emotional independence so that you're not triggered by their avoidant behavior. When you're truly content with distance, when you genuinely don't need their emotional availability, when you're authentically focused on your own life, that's when avoidants start to feel safe enough to pursue connection. The people who successfully break through avoidant walls aren't trying to break through them at all. They're living their lives so fully and independently that avoidants become curious about what they're missing. Instead of making the avoidant the center of their emotional world, they make themselves the center of their own world. This approach works because it addresses the core fear that drives avoidant behavior, the fear of losing themselves in a relationship. When you demonstrate that you don't need them to complete you, that you won't disappear into their life, and that you can maintain your own identity regardless of their emotional availability, you remove the threat that triggers their defensive walls. Avoidants are attracted to independence because it mirrors their own values and doesn't threaten their autonomy. When they see someone who genuinely doesn't need them but chooses to spend time with them anyway, it feels safe to get closer. The relationship becomes about wanting rather than needing, which is the only kind of connection that feels sustainable to an avoidant. Your emotional independence also triggers something psychologists call the hedonic treadmill in reverse. Just as avoidants get used to having your attention and start taking it for granted, they also notice when that attention becomes less available. Your independence creates a natural pull that doesn't require you to chase or pursue. The technique that breaks avoidant walls fastest is demonstrating through your behavior that you're equally comfortable with connection and separation. You enjoy their company when they're available, but you don't suffer when they're not. You appreciate their attention when they give it, but you don't require it to feel whole. This balanced approach communicates safety to avoidants in a language they understand. It shows them that you won't become emotionally dependent, that you won't try to control their autonomy, and that you won't punish them for their need for space. It proves that being close to you won't cost them their independence. The moment an avoidant realizes you're not going to chase them, try to fix them, or make them responsible for your emotional well-being, something shifts in their entire approach to the relationship. The walls they built to protect against emotional pressure become unnecessary because you're not applying any pressure. This shift happens faster than most people expect because avoidants are constantly scanning for threats to their autonomy. When they determine that you're not a threat, that you actually support their independence rather than challenge it, their defensive system starts to relax. The walls don't crumble gradually, they drop suddenly because the perceived danger is gone. But here's where most people make a critical mistake. They see the walls starting to come down and immediately rush back into pursuit mode. They interpret the avoidant's increased openness as permission to push for more intimacy, ask for more commitment, or try to lock in the connection they've been wanting. This immediately reactivates the avoidant's defensive system and the walls go back up, often stronger than before. The people who successfully maintain an avoidance openness understand that the walls coming down isn't an invitation to change their approach. They continue to respect the avoidant's autonomy, maintain their own independence, and let the connection develop naturally without forcing it into traditional relationship frameworks. This requires a fundamental shift in how you think about relationships. Instead of viewing connection as something you achieve through effort, pursuit, and emotional labor, you start seeing it as something that happens naturally when two people feel safe being themselves around each other. For avoidants, feeling safe means knowing they won't lose themselves in the relationship. The technique that consistently breaks through avoidant walls is what psychologists call secure functioning, being genuinely comfortable with both intimacy and autonomy, both connection and independence. When you embody this balance, avoidants feel safe approaching you because you're not going to upset their carefully maintained equilibrium. Secure functioning means you don't take their need for space personally, you don't interpret their independence as rejection, and you don't try to change their attachment style to match your own needs. You appreciate them as they are while maintaining your own emotional stability, regardless of how they show up in the relationship. This approach works so quickly because it eliminates the internal conflict that drives avoidant behavior. Avoidants want connection, but fear losing themselves in it. When you demonstrate that connection with you actually supports their autonomy rather than threatens it, the internal conflict disappears, and they can approach the relationship without triggering their defensive patterns. The specific behaviors that communicate this safety to avoidants include maintaining your own social life and interests, being comfortable with periods of no contact, expressing appreciation without creating obligation, sharing your own independence and self-sufficiency, and responding to their distance with your own contentment rather than anxiety. These behaviors work because they directly address the fears that created the avoidance walls in the first place. Every avoidant learned that relationships come with costs, loss of freedom, emotional obligations, or pressure to be someone they're not. When you demonstrate that relationship with you actually enhances their freedom and supports their authentic self, their resistance dissolves. The walls break because the reason for having them disappears. Avoidance built defenses against people who might control them, need them too much, or try to change them. When you show through consistent behavior that you're none of those things, the defenses become unnecessary protection against a threat that doesn't exist. This isn't about suppressing your own needs or pretending you don't want closeness. It's about developing genuine emotional security that doesn't depend on another person's behavior or availability. When you reach this level of security, you naturally become attractive to avoidance because you represent connection without threat. The speed at which this works often surprises people because we're conditioned to think that breaking down emotional barriers takes time and effort. But avoidant walls aren't necessarily thick or strong. They're just automatically activated by certain triggers. When you remove the triggers, the walls serve no purpose and come down naturally. What makes some people naturally good at this approach is that they've already developed secure attachment patterns through their own growth work. They don't need external validation, they're comfortable with uncertainty, and they can appreciate connection without clinging to it. These qualities naturally create the conditions where avoidance feels safe to be vulnerable. For people who weren't born with these secure patterns, developing them requires conscious practice. You have to train yourself to respond to avoidant behavior with curiosity rather than anxiety, independence rather than pursuit, and contentment rather than frustration. This emotional training is what allows you to approach avoidance in ways that feel safe to them. The technique works because it aligns with avoidant values rather than challenging them. Avoidants value independence, authenticity, and freedom from emotional pressure. When your approach to them supports these values while still creating space for connection, they don't experience the relationship as a threat to their core needs. The walls that seemed impenetrable to everyone else weren't really about keeping people out. They were about protecting the avoidant's sense of self. When you demonstrate that being close to you actually strengthens rather than threatens their identity, the protection becomes unnecessary. Understanding this dynamic allows you to approach avoidance with confidence rather than desperation, curiosity rather than neediness, and appreciation rather than demand. These emotional states naturally draw avoidance closer because they don't trigger the fears that usually make them withdraw. The transformation happens quickly because avoidants are often just as tired of their walls as everyone else is. They built those defenses for protection, not because they enjoy being isolated. When they feel genuinely safe to connect without losing themselves, many avoidants are eager to experience the intimacy they've been defending against. But maintaining this dynamic requires ongoing commitment to your own emotional growth and independence. You can't fake the security that makes avoidance feel safe. It has to be genuine. This means doing the work to heal your own attachment wounds, developing a fulfilling life outside of relationships, and learning to find validation from within rather than from others. But knowing the psychology behind this approach is only half the equation. The other half is learning to implement these principles in real-time interactions. The difference between understanding the concept and actually executing it lies in recognizing the specific moments when avoidant walls are either being reinforced or dismantled through your responses. The first practical skill you need to develop is emotional mirroring without emotional investment. This means matching their level of engagement without becoming emotionally dependent on their response. When they text you with casual energy, you respond with equal casualness. When they're being distant, you become equally focused on your own activities. This isn't about being cold or calculating. It's about naturally reflecting their emotional availability back to them. Most people struggle with this because they interpret avoidant distance as rejection and respond with pursuit energy. But the moment you chase someone who's creating space, you've activated their flight response. Instead, practice responding to their distance with your own contentment. When they cancel plans, make better plans for yourself. When they become less communicative, become more focused on your own projects and relationships. This mirroring technique works so quickly because it eliminates the push-pull dynamic that keeps avoidant walls in place. Avoidants are used to people reacting to their distance with anxiety, which confirms their belief that relationships create pressure and obligation. When you respond to their distance with your own independence, it short-circuits this pattern immediately. The second critical skill is learning to express interest without creating pressure. Avoidants can sense neediness and obligation from miles away, and these energies immediately trigger their defensive systems. Practice communicating appreciation and enjoyment without implying expectation or requirement. Instead of saying, "I really need to see you," try, "I enjoy our time together." Instead of, "Where is this going?" try, "I like how this feels." This subtle shift in language removes the pressure that makes avoidants want to run while still communicating your positive feelings about the connection. You're sharing your experience without making it their responsibility to reciprocate or maintain it. The timing of when you implement these techniques is crucial. The moments when avoidant walls are most likely to crumble are immediately after they've created distance and you've responded with genuine independence rather than pursuit. This response is so unexpected that it often causes them to pause and reconsider their assumptions about your intentions. Pay attention to these moments of reconsideration. Avoidance will often test your independence by creating distance, then observe how you respond. When you pass these tests by maintaining your own emotional stability and focus, they start to feel safe approaching you because you've proven you won't become clingy or demanding if they get closer. Another practical technique involves reframing how you think about their avoidant behaviors. Instead of interpreting their need for space as rejection, start viewing it as information about their emotional capacity. When they withdraw, instead of thinking, "They don't care about me," think, "They're managing their emotional bandwidth." This reframe helps you respond with understanding rather than anxiety. This shift in perspective naturally changes your behavior in ways that feel safer to avoidants. You stop taking their behaviors personally and start responding to them as neutral information about their internal state. This creates space for them to be authentic about their needs without feeling like they're hurting you or letting you down. The speed at which walls crumble also depends on your consistency. Avoidants need to see that your independence and emotional stability aren't just temporary strategies. They need to witness that this is genuinely how you operate in relationships. This means maintaining your own life, interests, and emotional center even when they're being more available and open. Many people make the mistake of abandoning their independence the moment an avoidant starts showing more interest. They interpret increased availability as permission to become more dependent or demanding. This immediately reactivates the avoidant's defensive system because it confirms their fear that people only act independent until they get what they want. Instead, maintain the same energy and approach that attracted them in the first place. Continue being someone who enhances their life rather than complicates it, who supports their autonomy rather than threatens it, and who appreciates their authentic self rather than trying to change them. The final piece of practical implementation involves recognizing when walls are coming down versus when they're being reinforced. Avoidant walls come down when they start initiating contact more frequently, sharing more personal information, making future plans, or expressing appreciation for your independence. They go back up when they become more evasive, cancel plans repeatedly, or start emphasizing their need for space. Learning to read these signals allows you to adjust your approach in real time, maintaining the dynamic that keeps them feeling safe to connect, while avoiding the behaviors that trigger their defensive responses. The people who can consistently break through avoidant walls aren't using techniques or strategies. They're embodying a way of being that naturally feels safe to avoidance. They've developed genuine emotional independence that allows them to connect without clinging, care without controlling, and love without losing themselves. This approach doesn't just work with romantic relationships. the same principles apply to friendships, family relationships, and professional connections with avoidant individuals. When you can interact with avoidants in ways that support rather than threaten their autonomy, you'll find that their walls come down much faster than you expected. Remember that breaking through avoidant walls isn't about getting them to become someone different. It's about creating conditions where they feel safe to be more of who they already are. When you approach them with genuine respect for their autonomy and authentic appreciation for their independence, the walls that kept everyone else out become bridges that draw you closer. The walls crumble instantly when avoidants realize that connecting with you actually enhances their freedom rather than limiting it, and that being vulnerable with you strengthens rather than threatens their sense of self. Have you ever seen an avoidant's entire behavior change when someone approached them differently? Have you noticed how some people seem to effortlessly connect with emotionally distant individuals while others struggle for years? Share in the comments what you've observed about the difference between approaches that work and those that backfire. If this helped you understand that breaking avoidant walls is about removing threats rather than applying pressure, like this video and subscribe for more insights into creating connections that feel safe to even the most guarded people. Thanks for watching.